Tonight we begin the elevations, and the first thing I want us to look at is the overhang detail. The overhang is the distance from the frame wall to the outside face of the roof there. In this particular case, it's going to the trim, and it's going to be 2 feet from the frame line here at the stud all the way out to here. So in elevation, trying to draw every single line of things you would see there, they would all bleed together. So it's more common for architects just to draw the trim and the fascia lines, basically 3 lines, rather than try to get all those lines that possibly you would be seeing, because it would be so many lines in one place they would just all bleed together. So what you're looking at sort of sideways there is the fascia board is here, the trim board is here, and then the plywood sheathing's on top. Flashings out here in front of the trim. That wasn't always required. That's been a recent code requirement. But the 1x2 over the 2x8 fascia is here. 2x8, of course, is 1.5 by 7 1/4, and a 1x2 is 3/4 by 1.5. But it's basically an elevation. You end up seeing this line, the top of the trim, the bottom of the trim, and the bottom of the fascia for the roof. But you're looking at it in an elevation. But what it's actually representing is the fascia and the trim board here. Obviously, if you try to draw where the plywood is and where the lines for the metal, anyway, it gets at an 1/8 scale, it all bleeds together, so nobody does that. They just draw the lines for the trim and the bottom of the fascia here. So looking at it from the other side, kind of from the elevation view, it looks more like that. So that's the detail you're looking at there. And it's important to know where the overhang is, because it's going to drive basically where the roof is. Also, in this particular case, our roof pitch ends up, if we're at 2 feet out, we're 4 3/4 inches down, more or less fractionally, to the top of the trim. So that's what we're going to use in the elevations. So from the plate height, let me show you the wall section. From the plate height, which is here, this trim board ends up being lower than the plate. You never actually see the top of the plate in the elevation, but depending on where that is, it's going to determine how far this drops down. And the higher the pitch, the shorter the overhang, because you're pivoting off of one point. Obviously, this point over here keeps getting less and less if you pivot off that same point. So you can kind of see it here. Here's the top of the plate. Here's the top of the trim. So the top of the trim here is 4 3/4 inches down from the top of the plate there. Think of the framing, which we talked about last week, as the skeleton of the house that holds everything up. And it also drives where things are placed in the elevation. So you can think of the exterior materials as the skin, the framing as the skeleton. You never actually see the skeleton, just like you don't see the skeleton unless something's wrong. Yeah, you know, through your skin. So it's sort of the same idea, but where that stuff is determines what you draw in the elevation and where you draw it. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind while we do this. So the very first thing we're going to do tonight is actually create a UCS to use. It just stands for Universal Coordinate System. It's a way that you can turn the drawing so you don't have to draw sideways or upside down, basically. There will be several new layers for the elevations and also some new layers for the roof plan as well. You don't have to add those just yet, but anyway, there will be all those new layers, and then we'll create some new layer states as well, because we're going to need one for the first floor and the roof plan and the elevations, and also for the second floor, the roof plan and the elevations, so you'll be able to orthographically project things from the floor plan. If your second floor is not currently stacked over the first floor, now is the time to move it to the correct position, because you're going to have to do that to orthographically project, like I'm going to talk about. All right, so UCS. Some people like it, some people don't. I've been asked by Erling Clark to do it this way because it's the way they teach it in 1405. A lot of people actually line up the elevations all the way across and just project back and forth that way. But this is the other way to do it with the UCS, and it's a good way to know. If you're using one building, it works pretty well. If you're using multiple elevations, it gets a little bit tricky because you've got so many lines going on, but there's a lot of lines just with one elevation. Okay, so if you want to follow along, you should save wherever you're at, whatever you're going to turn in, and then we're going to create the UCS first. Now the UCS is just it's kind of like a compass. It's basically, you can think of it like that. Essentially, you're going to have northeast, west, and south. Well, all the UCS does is create a ground line. So if you're looking at the elevation from this particular view, in other words, let's put it this way. Here's the house, and say, the elevation that faces the direction. So this face on this side of the house is actually the south elevation. It's the way the elevation faces, not the way you're facing. This would be the north. This is the east. And this is the west. In our particular case, it also is going to correspond to front, rear, right side, and left side. Typically, more often you get commercial construction, particularly you'll see north, south, east, and west. You won't see so much front, rear. You see that more in residential. All right, so if we're looking at this, and this is looking at this plan, and then we're now elevating this, basically the ground line is always the X direction, and the Y direction is always to the left side. So when it asks you for coordinates for the UCS, if you wanted to turn the direction you want to, you have to establish the X direction and the Y direction, and then it turns it. That's basically. So if you're looking at it this way, of course, you're looking at the elevation like this, but the ground line is still here. The left side is still there. So that would be X and that would be Y. Just think about it all the way around like that. So if you're not used to thinking that way, it's all right. I created a cheat sheet to help us with this. And it's a tool that we use. It's not necessarily, it's basically based on a square, although I had to move it out a little further on both sides because the plan was a little bit wider than is deep. All right, so I'm going to open AutoCAD. All right, so if you're finished with everything, this is for the first and second floor. This is where you'll be at, and you'll have the first and second floor set up. I've got all my model layers turned on and thawed right now. By the way, this is turn all layers on, the third one down, and this is thaw all layers. So if you ever want to both turn on and thaw all layers, just hit the first and third buttons there, and that does it very quickly. Another thing I noticed with a couple of people, and I always forget to mention this because I don't think about it, if you go to options, because I don't think, and you go to, I believe it's selection, I don't like the lasso at all because it doesn't work well for architectural drawings. I would uncheck that, and that way when you come back in and try to window or cross something, it comes in as a rectangle rather than that weird shaped lasso, which doesn't do you much good in architecture. It takes a lot longer to do things with that than just with the square. By the way, there's a difference between, if you don't realize it, between windowing something and crossing something. If you go from right to left and you get the green, it catches everything it crosses. If you go the other way and you get the blue, it's only the stuff that's inside the box that it's going to pick up. So, in other words, so if I went this way, even though I've got 3 lines there, the only thing it might pick up is that, but it didn't even pick up that because that's a block. So let's try a different one. So let's say like here. So I crossed this line with it, but it didn't pick up that line because it has to be in the box for that direction. The other direction though, it'll pick both lines up. So the crossing direction picks everything up. The window, the other direction, the blue box, only the stuff inside the box. That's just a clarification. All right, has nothing to do with the UCS, but anyway, that lasso drives me crazy. I don't know why that's even in there. I don't think it's for architecture. All right, to put in the UCS, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to have to reset the UCS follow to 1, or otherwise this won't work. So UCS, it didn't type it anyway. It's UCS follow that. It should be set to 1 for this. So you enter that. All right, so now we need coordinates and we need to set up the views. So we got to go to view. And right now I don't see either one of those up here. So this is one of those things, it doesn't necessarily default and open those two boxes. So kind of hover over one of the panels up there and right click and say show panels. And you need to turn on coordinates for one of them. And it looks like my name views may already be on. Okay, the name, if this is not up, you can also check name views. You need both of those, coordinates and the name views. So it really wouldn't matter which way you started with this, which direction you went, as long as you get all 4 elevations. I'm going to do the right side first, but before we do that, we're going to insert our tool to help us create the UCS. So we're going to go to insert and go to my blocks. I'm just going to be in the user directory, not the user, the shared directory is what I'm trying to say. Instructors, come to my, and go to elevations. What you get there, blocks, elevations, and it's the first ones on the list. Elevations locator block. It goes on the left rear first floor framing corner. It's going to come in with kind of an X. So basically it goes right here. It's the far left at the back, right there on the framing. Once it's in, it should look something like that. Alright, I would leave it unexploded for now. We'll have to explode it in a little bit, but for now that's fine. Hopefully your ortho was on. We don't want to be skewed one way or the other. Should be exactly vertical and horizontal. If you have a more square plan, you could have used a square, but basically I had to expand equally in both directions for this to work. But basically these are 45-degree lines, and as long as we're crossing the lines in the same place, we can project around. Alright, to create the UCS, and I'm going to do the one for the right side elevation or the east elevation first. So looking at over there, X would be up and down and Y would be at the bottom like a horizontal line, and you do that by using the 3-point coordinate. Alright, so you've always got the X direction, the Y direction, and then where they cross is the origin. So this would be X, like the ground line in that direction. This would be Y, and you can see that it turned the drawing. Alright, so what we need to do now is come up here and name the UCS. It's the one to the left of the world there. Alright, so we got the unnamed, right click, rename, and we'll call it, I erased it, what is that? That's going to be the east, which is actually the right side. You have to okay that twice. I've never understood why you have to okay that twice, but you do. Alright, so, but we're not finished. That only creates the UCS. We also want to create a named view for that. So we go to the view manager here and go to new. Same thing we just typed in, east, right side, View category is elevations. View type is still. Current display would be fine, but we wanted to find the window. You can either check this or check this. It's the same thing. Either this icon or that's going to come to the same thing. It's going to give you that. You want to go from the bottom corner to the top corner here, and then enter, and then say OK, and OK again, and that'll create a named view for that direction. Now if you could keep track of the X and Y without having to worry about it too much, you could just continue on from there. For me, it's just better to go back to the world and then work my way back through each elevation. So if I set it back to world, it sets it back to the original. So if I go to do the rear view now, this has to be X because that would be the ground line, and if I'm looking at it in that direction, then the left side's going to be over here. So 3-point origin, this would be X, this would be Y. Garage should be over here. If it's not over there, you did something wrong. All right, so then we're going to name that UCS, and this one's going to be north. Got to right click, rename, north, rear. Say OK, got to OK it twice, and then we still need to give it a view name. So view manager, new. View name is, what did I just say, north. View category, you can just use the drop down because we've typed it in at this point. Hit the icon, go from this corner to that corner, enter that, and it's OK it. Alright, so that gets the rear. I'm going to go back to world again. Again, you don't necessarily have to go back to world, it just makes it easier for me to think about it. Alright, so over here, this would be the X direction. That would be the Y direction, so 3-point. Origin is here. I just almost did that wrong. This is the X direction. This is the Y direction. So the front porch is out on the right side, the rear porch is out on the left side. All right, we're going to rename the UCS. So that's going to be west, which is also the left side. Okay, that twice, and then we're going to create through the view manager the same thing. Okay, that. All right, and then I'm going to go back to world again, which brings us back to the beginning. Technically, I guess you wouldn't necessarily have to create it, but to do what we're going to do with printing later, we need to set up a view for this. So we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So 3-point for that. This is the X direction. That's the origin. That's the Y. So it looks pretty much the same, but we still need to rename it. So this happens to be south, which is also the front. Okay, that twice. And then we're going to create a view for it through the view manager. New, again, south. What did I just say? Front. All right, so we now have both named UCS and also named views. So we've got east, north, south, and west, and we also have it here. All right, so the advantage to this, or at least some of the advantage, is you can turn the drawing now in the direction you want to, typically you would draw down here because you'd be projecting down and that's the direction you'd be drawing in. So you could pick any one of those and turn it whatever direction you need. And you can do it from here. So whether you're in the floor plan or in the elevation or the roof plan, you can turn the drawing whether or not you're in this particular tab. So it allows you to do that over here. Now, before we do anything else, you should probably create the layers, because we're going to use those to set up the layer states. You're going to have several new layers for the elevations and also for the roof plan. So, a elevation anno for the text, dimensions for the dimensions, cuts the ground line, darks the main part of the elevation, glazing is the glass. Hidden is usually the hinges on the windows and doors. A lot has to do with trim and some other things. So does the medium and patterns, the siding and roof patterns. And then we've got text dimensions, basically the wall layer and the roof outline itself, and then beams, and then the patterns on the roof. So all these layers here, there's two different handouts, one for the elevation and one for the roof. The roof, I think, is behind everything else at the very end. The elevation layers are here at the beginning. It also has some additional temporary elevation projections. If you want to do that, you can. It's not necessary, not technically necessary. Sometimes it's good to have that when you're not sure where things are going. The X guidelines came in with the block that we put in. That should already be in there. You didn't create it, but once you bring in a block, typically that will create the layer. This one, X guidelines, should already be in there once you bring it into the drawing. So if you will spend a few minutes and create those elevation layers and the roof layers, then we'll get back to the layer states that we need to create, and then we'll start the elevations themselves.